Now, we know for a fact that national security and development are interrelated and intertwined. And the US government agency that is on the front lines of this interconnection is the US Agency for International Development. We are honored to have with us USAID's Deputy Administrator, Isobel Coleman. And the moderator for this part will be the FIU alumna Pierina Anton. Pi is a recipient of USAID's prestigious Payne Fellowship, and she is currently in graduate school at Georgetown and will become a USAID Foreign Service Officer right after graduation. So please give it up for Deputy Administrator Coleman and Pi.
Thank you so much, Leland. And I just want to briefly thank FIU, JGI, Brian Fonseca for having me here today. It's really exciting to be moderating this panel with Deputy Administrator Coleman. Deputy Administrator, you have an incredible breadth of experience in foreign policy and development. And I specifically want to talk a little bit about your experience with gender equality and women's empowerment, because we know that in Latin America and the Caribbean, there's increasing rates of gender-based violence. Feminicide is a huge concern, and especially for women and girls that are involved in political and civic advocacy engagements, there's targeting of these women and girls. So I wanted to ask a little bit about what USAID specifically is doing to encourage and empower these women and girls who are at the front lines of political activism in the region. How is USAID supporting these champions?
Well, thank you. And let me just start out by saying what a pleasure it is to be here today. This is my first visit to FIU. And I have had the opportunity to meet with students today, undergraduates, master's students, PhD students, really impressive group and terrific work that you're doing. And how about a round of applause for Pi, who's about to join our foreign service, which I think is incredible. We're thrilled to have you on board. I'm so happy that you start with this question, because I do think the way that countries treat women is really a marker for so much about that society and that economy. And women have made great strides in Latin America in many ways. We've certainly seen tremendous gains among women on the educational front, as in many countries around the world now. In many Latin American countries, women outnumber men in higher education, but they still, as we know, face many, many barriers in the real economy. USAID has invested heavily not only in girls' education to help support the gains that we've seen across so many countries, but has also focused very much on women's leadership, women journalists, women civil society leaders, women politicians. I caught the end of the conversation that Juan Gonzalez was having about Colombia. The vice president of Colombia is in fact a former implementing partner of USAID. So we work with many, many different women leaders across the region. But of course, we know that as you mentioned, rates of violence against women are very high. We have a number of programs that are very much focused on countering violence against women. And I think that while we have specific programs that are really geared towards helping women escape violent situations, and a lot of work on destigmatizing domestic violence, things that, or the actions against domestic violence, bringing more transparency to that. I would also say that providing economic opportunities for women provides them with the ability to escape dangerous situations too. You know, some of the work, for example, that we've done on land titling. We've worked in Colombia, just sticking with that as an example, helping marginalized populations receive land titles. I think we will do over 11,000 in Colombia alone and in recent years of helping people get title to their land, and 50% of that will go to women. And once you have title to your land, you can use it as collateral, you can start a business. There are many benefits that flow from that. And we've seen around the world a strong correlation between more economic independence and lower levels of violence. So that's just one example of the type of programming that we're doing, not only specifically to address violence against women, but also to provide women with economic opportunities, to lift up women's voices politically, and to really encourage women leadership in civil society.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really glad that you mentioned the point about economic opportunity, because my background is in education and youth empowerment. And we know that in Latin America and the Caribbean, a fourth of the population is age 15 to 29. And yet it has one of the highest rates of out of school and out of work youth. And so with that comes a lack of economic opportunity, but also, a risk of alternative means of gaining that economic opportunity through, involvement in criminal organizations or others. So I'd really like to know how USAID is, uplifting young people and providing them with inroads to economic opportunity. How does access to education, jobs, healthcare, and all those other essential services help promote youth empowerment and opportunity? Yeah. And on a second note, also, how is USAID including youth in those decision-making processes about their futures?
So when you look at Latin American economies, I would remind people here about the impact that COVID had on Latin American economies. I mean, it was a very significant impact. First of all, very high fatality rates from COVID compared to other parts of the world, and also a significant economic loss, that it has not fully recovered from. So the economic urgency around some of the topics you're talking about is even more today than in recent years. And youth have borne the brunt of this in many ways. And you noted the very high rates of out of school youth and also high youth unemployment. So a lot of the work that we do does focus on youth and really tries to engage youth in all sorts of different ways. A lot of training, a lot of vocational training, connecting youth, between trying to bridge that gap between education and employment, and looking at ways to make that transition easier. So we've invested in a whole range of different programs that really try to build up much needed skills in different areas. And sometimes, we have this challenge in our own country. People leave university and maybe their skill set isn't quite tailored to what job opportunities exist. So USAID has been a connector in that respect and has done youth training in a variety of different places. But it is a challenge, and I think having a robust set of opportunities for young people is one of the most important challenges facing governments across the region. Yeah. And of course is a source when it doesn't exist, it leads into migration.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that USAID is doing really, really well at and trying to advance is its localization efforts. And so on the note about, the importance of including youth, but also other marginalized groups like indigenous actors and land defenders, how is USAID working to include them in the decision-making processes and making sure that they have a seat at the table on these decisions as well?
So localization it's not a new effort at USAID. I mean, this is an effort that's been underway for many, many years, but it is, this administration is approaching it with a really reinvigorated sense of urgency, because we firmly believe that putting local people in the seat of decision-making is not only the right thing to do, but really does lead to better outcomes. And so, not everything is going to be locally led, but more than what we're doing today is our goal. We have set targets that I think are quite ambitious targets. We just, as recently as a year and a half ago, we were at around 6% of direct funding to local organizations. And we are on a path by 2025 to raise that to 25%. So we're going to see really a doubling of that over the next, every year, or close to a doubling every year for the next couple of years, from a relatively low number, but we're very determined to get it up to that 25%. And then by 2030, have local input into 50% of our programming.
Wow.
Which is a different definition, but really have 25% that is locally led, locally directed to local organizations, and then 50% that is really relying on local, strong local input. So that, presents its own challenges. I mean, we are a very big organization. We're not always easy to work with. And so it requires us to do a lot of inward thinking about how to make our systems, our programs more accessible to local organizations that might not have all of the backbone, the operational capabilities that we require from, a US taxpayer fiduciary responsibility. So we have been investing in local organizations and really building up that capacity with a focus on women-led organizations too, and youth-led organizations, helping some of them start out as subcontractors to some of the bigger organizations that might be our primary contractors, and then with a very explicit intent to build up that capacity and understanding that those grants will be transferred to these local organizations over time as they demonstrate their ability to meet all of the operational requirements on our end. But we're doing this because, as I said, it's not only the right thing to do, but it's really the most effective way, we think, of having impact in local communities is to make sure it's aligned with what local people want.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think really the key to development is in the hands of our local partners, and the more that we're able to empower them and give them the keys to unlocking the future of their own countries, the better that their country will be for it, and the more respected that our organization and our other agencies that are working on these issues will be in the region. So I want to shift gears a little bit to talk about the digitalization of the last few decades that we've seen. We know that it presents an enormous opportunity to help address some of the challenges of development, but it also presents a risk.
Challenges.
Exactly. A risk of malign actors using that digitalization, those emerging technologies to suppress dissent and to engage in further violence or exploitation of vulnerable groups. And so what is USAID doing to strengthen the work on digital democracy efforts, digital information resilience, and digital security in the region? And because the theme of this conference is partnerships in a divisive decade, what kind of cross-sector partnerships do we need to make sure that these systems are bolstered against malign influences?
Well, thank you for that great question. Certainly the digital space is essential to everything that we do. I mean, everything is now has a, more and more has a digital component, and making sure that countries understand the security of their digital backbone. We do work around the world on cybersecurity and on helping countries, little known work that USAID does, but we work with countries on a lot of procurement, helping build their own capacity in procurement so that they can make smart procurement decisions and understand when they're purchasing 5G systems, that they understand the true cost of it over time, that they can make good decisions on the security of those systems and things like that. We also do a lot of work with individuals helping to close that digital divide. We talked about focus on women earlier. We know that women tend to have less access than men in many countries around the world to the digital space. And we do a lot of work on closing that digital divide. We work with companies like Microsoft in a country like Guatemala to help bring digital access to more marginalized populations. There are many places in Guatemala that really have very, very low access to the internet. And so helping to bring digital infrastructure, but also digital training to close the digital divide and help people understand how to access information in a safe way and with full understanding, to question what they're reading. And so we do a lot of training like that in countries around the world, including in Latin America. And I do think, certainly as AI expands, I mean, this is going to be work that is more important in every country around the world. You can't trust what you're seeing online, and how do you evaluate different sources and think about the information you're receiving. So it's a complicated set of issues, but we do see more and more need for it as there is more and more disinformation out there. Right. So it's complicated terrain, but we, as I said, have been working for years on a safe, secure digital ecosystem and helping people have greater access to it.
Absolutely. So we're in Florida. We know that next month hurricane season starts again. And across the region, there's been numerous climate-related shocks and events that are also driving environmental migration. What do you see as the biggest challenge when it comes to addressing climate change and the intersection of climate change and development, especially when such a large majority of individuals are fleeing because of climate-related events in the region?
Well, we are on the cusp of hurricane season, and fingers crossed that it is a nothing burger of a hurricane season for this part of the world. I had the chance this morning to go visit USAID's humanitarian logistics hub here in Miami, which was pretty impressive. We have a whole logistics hub here, and this warehouse with 20,000 square feet, 1,400 pallets of everything from emergency tents and hygiene, blankets, you name it, that can be shipped out at a moment's notice. We hope it's not needed, but in case it is, we're ready. And we also work closely with Southcom here on really understanding when a catastrophe hits, what they can bring to the table if there's not another alternative to deliver emergency assistance quickly to an affected country. Look, I think we are aware that every dollar invested in resiliency has $10 of benefit in averted costs. We know that it's a very striking figure. We just see ourselves spending more and more money in the aftermath of emergencies and environmental disasters around the world, flooding, drought, all of these things. It's hard to get the resources that are necessary to invest in prevention, to invest in resiliency. We're always a little bit behind the 8 ball and trying to deal with the crisis of the day. But we are investing what we can. We are trying to shift budgets more towards resiliency and adaptation and making changes to whether it's local irrigation systems to capture water in drought-prone areas, to prevent flooding in flooding-prone areas, help make minor changes to housing so that they're more resilient. It's this whole providing geospatial data for farmers around the world so that they have a better understanding of drought conditions and when to plant their crops, early warning systems for people when a hurricane is bearing down, a typhoon in Asia, here in this part of the world, a hurricane, so that they can get to safety, take their belongings, put them up on higher levels, I mean, whatever it may be. And we've seen dramatic benefits from this in terms of lives lost, big reduction from hurricanes that used to kill tens of thousands of people. Now today, much less loss of life, but we're still seeing huge economic damage, economic damage to homes, to infrastructure, to livelihoods. And that's, where we have to get smarter on how to be more resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. My last question really is about what's happening in the hemisphere with the migration crisis as it relates to Venezuelan migrants. A panelist earlier, cited that it's the largest scale humanitarian crisis outside of an active war, outside of Syria, which is really striking. And as someone who, I'm from Venezuela, my family is directly impacted by this. A lot of countries in the region initially were very welcoming of Venezuelan migrants. And in the past few years, we've seen kind of a shift towards more xenophobic attitudes, more hesitancy when it comes to supporting Venezuelan refugees and migrants in the region. So how can we kind of combat this kind of trend that we're seeing so that we can ensure that those individuals that have been displaced from their home countries have the opportunities to, gain access to services, while also, understanding and supporting those local governments that are really feeling the strain on their social services and resources for their own community. So yeah, it's a double-edged, challenge. So would love to hear more about that.
It is a double-edged challenge, and there are few issues like migration that cause as much of political division in countries around the world, and Latin American countries are not immune from that. We have seen, what is it now? Over 5 million Venezuelan migrants, leave for a variety of different reasons, but really just increasing lack of hope and change in their own country. And they've gone to their neighboring countries, Colombia, Peru, Brazil. I mean, we see it all across Ecuador, across the region. And also, of course, now through the Darien Gap up to country Panama. I mean, you've got all the way up through our southern border. The set of tools that we have are ultimately, limited at the end of the day. And USAID, we have been working in countries that, like Colombia, that has allowed migrants to stay and have their version of TPS, temporary protection status there, and the ability to work there. We've worked hard to provide integration services. We have integration centers. I actually had the chance to go visit Colombia last November and opened one of these integration centers. It's sort of a one-stop shop for people who can come and register and access health and enroll their kids in school and get their working papers and everything else. And also we have provided cash as a way of helping people start a new life in this country. We were talking about localization earlier. There are few things more local than actually providing people with cash for them to make their own personalized individual decisions on what to do with that money. This has been a shift that you've seen in the humanitarian world. We've moved hugely away from providing in-kind assistance, giving people telling them what they're going to get. You know, here's a box with stuff in it, and that's what you're going to get. I mean, sometimes, of course, in an emergency context, we do that, but more and more around the world, we recognize that markets are vibrant and exist, and we give people cash so that they can actually buy what they need. So this is another form of localization that we have pursued. So, you know, we are working to try to help integrate migrants where they are. And that has been the USAID role for the most part, also providing more economic assistance to some of these countries to help host communities also benefit. I mean, we're very conscious of not wanting to make host communities feel that they're disadvantaged in any way. And then lastly, of course, we are the largest humanitarian provider in Venezuela itself. So we continue to provide hundreds of millions of dollars of assistance to Venezuela.
Thank you. Thank you. I know that, you know, again, as someone originally from Venezuela, that it truly does mean a lot to know that the US is there to support and make sure that one day, hopefully in the near future, we can see an end to the crisis and the political situation in the country. And before we end, since I know that there's a lot of students that are in the audience that, you know, are really interested in joining USAID or working in development in the future, if you have any words of wisdom or advice for the students here that would like to pursue a career in development.
Well, again, I'm thrilled to be here and to meet so many great students who are here and to hear of a number of individual stories of young students who've gotten recent jobs with USAID. And I think that's terrific. We have an MOU with FIU, really with the intent of showcasing opportunities at a place like USAID for young people coming out of the many different degree programs here that are highly relevant for the work that we do. So we encourage you to network, to keep your eye open on all of those job openings, and to be relentless in pursuing them, because there's a lot of talent. I've met some of that amazing talent today, and look forward to welcoming more of it to USAID in the coming years, just like Pi here joining our foreign service, which is fantastic.
Well, thank you so much, DA Coleman. This is incredible. And again, such a really just special moment for me to come back to FIU and talk to one of my future bosses. So thank you so much for your time and for being here.
Thank you so much.